talking about money mania. Sorry, my phone is a little crooked here. Money Mania, the Mississippi Scheme, from Memoirs of Extraordinary, Popular Delusions, and the Madness of Crowds by Charles Mackay. My name's May Doldala. My blog is yesfinanciallyfree.com. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to my blog. Just go to yesfinanciallyfree.com, put in your first name, email address on the right side, click the big red yes button, and you'll get a free ebook, Working Parents Guide to Financial Freedom, sent directly to your inbox. And you get emails about when I'm live, what I will be discussing. And in the summer, we are reading books about financial freedom. All right? So I'm excited to be here. These books are available online as well. And I will put the link in my blog so that if you want to read along, you can. All right? And this book has been recommended as one of the top financial books to read of all time, currently, by current financial advisors and people all over the world. So a little bit about myself. I live in Hawaii, Honolulu, Hawaii, with my 7-year-old son, Jordan, and my husband, Jamal. We own this condo, which is a 2-bedroom in Waikiki, and another condo, which is a 1-bedroom Airbnb business, also in Waikiki. Now, back in 2011, I didn't own any property, never had, wanted to. It was like a dream. And I had over $40,000 of credit card debts. But by 2016, I paid it all off, improved our family's net worth by $500,000, making almost $500 a month in passive income. And then I started coaching clients to do what I did. And I started buying properties as well. 3 properties to be exact. 2017, 18, 19, one property each year, sold one in 2019 to buy this one. So we own 2 now. And recently hit my net worth goal of $300,000. I had been working on that one for 2 years. And it kind of went down in COVID, but came back up. So that is a big milestone for me. And it's important to me to calculate, and this is what we do in our client meetings. And if you become a client of mine, we track our net worth. We track our passive income. We track the things that will make us wealthier and richer so that we can increase them. The more that you focus on, the more of what you focus on will expand. So if you track your net worth and you track your passive income, they grow over time, and that creates financial freedom. So that's what I do in my programs. I help people do that. So I've been tracking my net worth, which, as I said, was negative $40,000 in 2011, and now it's over $300,000. So this is a big milestone for me. And now will we continue reading our book? All right. So yesterday, on Monday, I read for quite a while. So I just stopped because I got tired of reading. So now we're going to continue on. I read for 40 minutes. It's a pretty long chapter. And basically what it talked about was this man named John Law. And he started out he inherited a fortune from his father, who was a banker. But he ended up being, he just spent all the money. And then he ended up living off of gambling. And he wandered through many countries because he was actually wanted for murder in the one that he was born in, and he had to leave. He was challenged to a duel, and he won the duel, and then he was charged for murder because he killed the guy in the duel. It's just kind of funny. Crazy law and order back then. Anyway, he ended up making friends in high places because of his gambling, his wealth, his amazing talent at gambling. Okay. And then he wanted to create a land bank. It was like this venture he really wanted to do, and nobody would do it. But finally, France would. He had a friend in France who became part of the government, and then they did a land bank. He became very wealthy because of that. And then he created this business idea where he said you could invest in the Mississippi. Yeah. And he was going to go to the Mississippi. He's going to go to the United States. And then it ended up being more the United States. It ended up being a bunch of other countries. And he was going to have a company where he would go there, explore, bring back treasures, right? And you would be a part of that company if you invested in this Mississippi adventure. And then that's when everything started going crazy. People started buying into all this. The bank that he created ended up being taken over by the government, the royal government of France, and they basically pillaged it. They reduced the value of the currency, robbed the bank pretty much, because the royal court was just terrible. They just had no idea of how to keep wealth. It's probably this is the precursor to the French Revolution, when they all get their heads cut off and driven out of France. And for what were doing back then, I could see why. Hi, McAfee Marie, welcome. Okay, so I'm just looking for where I left off. So what happened last was he was selling these shares of the Mississippi company, and so many people wanted them, he had to find a bigger place to sell them. So he rented a house with a huge garden, and then he let the guy who owned the garden, gave him rights to earn any money in the garden, and they would charge rent for anyone buying and selling shares of that company. And they had to buy and sell shares in that garden for it to be official. So the guy was making tons of money. And that's where we kind of left off. I'm trying to find where I left off here. Apologize. Okay, yeah. So remember I talked about, I remember the honest soldier. He was so mad. He told everyone they were crazy. Okay, antechambers, and the Office of Navy, Mr. Law coming, drive against it, upset her, the coachman. Okay. Let's do this part here. During this time, Law, the new Plutus, John Law, they're talking about Law, John Law, had become all at once the most important personage of the state. The antechambers of the regent were forsaken by the courtiers, peers, judges, and bishops thronged to the Hotel de Soissons. That's the hotel that he rented. Officers of the navy and army, ladies of title and fashion, and everyone to whom heredity, rank, or public employ gave a claim to precedence were to be found waiting in his antechambers to beg for a portion of his India stock. Law was so pestered that he was unable to see 1/10 part of the applicants, and every maneuver that ingenuity could suggest was employed to gain access to him. Peers, whose dignity would have been outraged if the regent had made them wait half an hour for an interview, were content to wait 6 hours. They were content to wait 6 hours for the chance of seeing Monsieur Law. Enormous fees were paid to his servants if they would merely announce their names. Ladies of rank employed the blandishments of their smiles for the same object, but many of them came day after day for a fortnight before they could obtain an audience. When Law accepted an invitation, he was sometimes so surrounded by ladies, all asking to have their names put down in his list as shareholders in the new stock, that in spite of his well-known and habitual gallantry, he was obliged to tear himself away par force. The most ludicrous stratagems were employed to have an opportunity of speaking to him. One lady, who had been striven in vain during several days, gave up in despair all attempts to see him at his own house, but ordered her coachman to keep a strict watch whenever she was out in her carriage, and if he saw Mr. Law coming, to drive against a post and upset her. The coachman promised obedience, and for 3 days the lady was driven incessantly through the town, praying inwardly for the opportunity to be overturned. At last she espied Mr. Law and pulled the string, called up to the coachman, "Upset us now, for God's sake, upset us now." The coachman drove against the post. The lady screamed. The coach was overturned, and Law, who had seen the accident, hastened to the spot to render assistance. The cunning dame was led into the Hotel de Soissons, where she soon thought it advisable to recover from her fright, and after apologizing to Mr. Law, confessed her stratagem. Law smiled and entered the lady in his books as the purchaser of a quantity of India stock. Another story is told of a Madame de Bouchard, who, knowing that Mr. Law was at dinner at a certain house, proceeded thither in her carriage and gave the alarm of fire. The company started from table, Law among the rest, but seeing one lady making all haste into the house towards him, while everybody was scampering away, he suspected the trick and ran off in another direction. Many other anecdotes are related, which, even though they may be a little exaggerated, are nevertheless worth preserving, as shewing the spirit of that singular period. The regent was one day mentioning, in the presence of D'Argenson, the Abbé de Bois, and some other persons, that he was desirous of disputing some lady of the rank at least of a duchess to attend upon his daughter at Medina. But, added he, I do not exactly know where to find one. No, replied one in affected surprise. I can tell you where to find every duchess in France. You have only to go to Mr. Law's. You will see them every one in his antechamber. Monsieur de Chirac, a celebrated physician, had bought stock at an unlucky period and was very anxious to sell out. Stock, however, continued to fall for 2 or 3 days, much to his alarm. His mind was filled with the subject, when he suddenly called upon to attend a lady who imagined herself unwell. He arrived, was shewn upstairs, and felt the lady's pulse. It falls, good God, it falls continually, he said musingly. While the lady looked up in his face, all anxiety for his opinion. Oh, Monsieur de Chirac, said she, starting to her feet and ringing the bell for assistance. I am dying, it falls. What falls? Inquired the doctor in amazement. My pulse, said the lady. I must be dying. Calm your apprehensions, my dear madame, said Monsieur de Chirac. I was speaking of the stocks. The truth is, I have been a great loser, and my mind is so disturbed I hardly know what I have been saying. The price of shares sometimes rose 10 or 20% in the course of a few hours, and many persons in the humbler walks of life who had risen poor in the morning went to bed in affluence. An extensive holder of stock, being taken ill, sent his servant to sell 250 shares at 8,000 livres each, the price at which they were then quoted. The servant went, and on his arrival in the Jardin de Soissons, found that in the interval the price had risen to 10,000 livres. The difference of 2,000 livres on the 250 shares amounted to 500,000 livres, or 20,000 pounds sterling. He very coolly transferred to his own use, and giving the remainder to his master, set out the same evening for another country. Law's coachman in a very short time made money enough to set up a carriage of his own, and requested permission to leave his service. Law, who esteemed the man, begged of him as a favor that he would endeavor before he went to find a substitute as good as him. The coachman consented, and in the evening brought 2 of his former comrades, telling Mr. Law to choose between them, and he would take the other. Cook, maids, and footmen were now and then as lucky, and in the full-blown pride of their easily acquired wealth made the most ridiculous mistakes, preserving the language and manners of their old with the finery of their new station. They afforded continual subjects for the pity of the sensible, the contempt of the sober, and the laughter of everybody. But the folly and meanness of the higher ranks of society were still more disgusting. One instance alone, related by the Duke of de Saint-Simon, will shew the unworthy avarice which affected the whole of society. A man of the name of Andre, without character or education, had, by a series of well-timed speculations in Mississippi bonds, gained enormous wealth in an incredibly short space of time. As St. Simon expresses it, he had amassed mountains of gold. As he became rich, he grew ashamed of the lowness of his birth, and anxious above all things to be allied to nobility. He had a daughter and an infant only 3 years of age, and he opened a negotiation with the aristocratic and needy family of Dorsey, that this child should, upon certain conditions, marry a member of that house. The Marquis Dorsey, in his shame, consented and promised to marry himself on her attaining the age of 12. If the father would pay him down the sum of 100,000 crowns and 20,000 livres every year until the celebration of the marriage. The Marquis himself was in his 33rd year. The scandalous bargain was duly signed and sealed, the stock jobber furthermore agreeing to settle upon his daughter on the marriage day a fortune of several millions. The Duke of Brancas, the head of the family, was present throughout the negotiation and shared in all the profits. St. Simon, who treated the matter with the levity becoming what he thought so good a joke, adds, the people did not spare their animadversions on this beautiful marriage, and further informs us that the project fell to the ground some months afterward by the overthrow of Law and the ruin of the ambitious Monsieur André. It would appear, however, that the noble family never had the honesty to return the 100,000 crowns. Amid events like these, which, humiliating though they be, partake largely of the ludicrous. Others occurred on a more serious nature. Robberies in the streets were of daily occurrence, in consequence of the immense sums in paper which people carried about with them. Assassinations were also frequent. One case in particular fixed the attention of the whole of France, not only on the account of the enormity of the offense, but on the rank and connections of the criminal. The Count Dorn, a young brother of the Prince Dorn, and related to the noble families of D'Arenberg, Deling, and de Montmorency, was a young man of dissipated character, extravagant to a degree and unprincipled as he was extravagant. In connection with two other young men, as reckless as himself, named Mille, a Piedmontese captain, and one d'Étain, or Lestan, a Fleming, he formed a design to rob a very rich broker, who was known, unfortunately for himself, to carry great sums about his person. The Count pretended to desire to purchase of him a number of shares in the Company of the Indies, and for that purpose appointed to meet him in a cabaret, or low public house, in the neighborhood of the Place de Vendôme. The unsuspecting broker was punctual to his appointment. So were the Count Dorn and his two associates, whom he introduced as his particular friends. After a few moments' conversation, the Count Dorn suddenly sprang upon his victim and stabbed him 3 times in the breast with a poignard. The man fell heavily to the ground, and while the Count was employed in rifling his portfolio of bonds in the Mississippi and Indian schemes to the amount of 100,000 crowns, Mille, the Piedmontese, stabbed the unfortunate broker again and again to make sure of his death. But the broker did not fall without a struggle, and his cries brought the people of the cabaret to his assistance. Lestan, the other assassin, who had been set to keep watch at the staircase, sprang from the window and escaped, but Mille and Count Dorn were seized in the very act. This crime, committed in open day and in so public a place as a cabaret, filled Paris with consternation. The trial of the assassins commenced on the following day, and the evidence being so clear, they were both found guilty and condemned to be broken alive on the wheel. The noble relatives of the Count Dorn absolutely blocked up the antechambers of the regent, praying for mercy on the misguided youth and alleging that he was insane. The regent avoided them as long as possible, being determined that in a case so atrocious, justice should take its course. But the importunity of these influential suitors was not to be overcome so silently, and they at last forced themselves into the presence of the regent and prayed him to save their house the shame of public execution. They hinted that the Prince Dorn were aligned to the illustrious family of Orleans, and added that the regent himself would be disgraced if a kinsman of his should die by the hands of a common executioner. The regent, to his credit, was proof against all their solicitations and replied to their last argument in the words of Corneille: Le crime fait la honte et non pas l'échafaud. Don't know what that means. Adding that whatever shame there might be in the punishment, he would very willingly share with the other relatives. Day after day they renewed their entreaties, but always with the same result. At last they thought if they could interest the Duc de Simon in their favor, a man for whom the regent felt sincere esteem, they might succeed in their object. The Duke, a thorough aristocrat, was as shocked as they were that a noble assassin should die by the same death as a plebeian felon. Oh my goodness. And represented to the regent the impolicy of making enemies of so numerous, wealthy, and powerful family. He urged, too, that in Germany, where the family of D'Arenberg had large possessions, it was a law that no relative of a person broken on will could succeed to any public office or employ until a whole generation had passed away. For this reason, he thought the punishment of the guilty count might be transmuted into beheading, which was considered all over Europe as much less infamous. The regent was moved by this argument and was about to consent when Law, who felt particularly interested in the fate of the murdered man, confirmed him in his former resolution to let the law take its course. The relatives Dorn were now reduced to the last extremity. The Prince de Montmorency, despairing of other methods, found means to penetrate into the dungeon of the criminal and offering him a cup of poison, imploring him to save them from disgrace. The Count Dorn turned his head and refused to take it. Montmorency pressed him once more, and losing all patience in his continued refusal, turned on his heel and exclaimed, Dear, then, as thou wilt, mean-spirited wretch, thou art fit only to perish by the hands of the hangman, left him to his fate. Doran himself petitioned the regent that he might be beheaded, but Law, who exercised more influence over his mind than any other person, with the exception of the notorious d'Abbé de Bois, his tutor, insisted that he could not in justice succumb to the self-interested views of the Dorans. The regent had from the first been of the same opinion. Within 6 days after the commission of their crime, Doran and Mill were broken on the wheel on the Place de Grève. The other assassin, Lestang, was never apprehended. The prompt and severe justice was highly pleasing to the populace of Paris. Even Monsieur de Quincampoix, as they called Law, came in for a share of their approbation for having induced the regent to shew no favor to a patrician. But the number of robberies and assassinations did not diminish. No sympathy was shown for rich jobbers when they were plundered. The general laxity of public morals, and conspicuous enough before, was rendered still more by its rapid pervasion of the middle classes, who had hitherto remained comparatively pure between the open vices of the class above and the hidden crimes of the class below them. The pernicious love of gambling diffused itself through society and bore all public and nearly all private virtue before it. So we'll continue reading tomorrow. Thanks for being on today's live. Please subscribe to the channel, and if you're on YouTube, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. We will continue reading live. And I appreciate you all for being here. Thank you. And if